So you mentioned teams. I think I wanted to touch upon both teams and environment. Like, how do you create the structure for innovation? And I was, Eric and Mihai are both a member of a collective called New Lab, which is in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And there's kind of that collective on one floor that's almost a part of a larger collective that's in the building. And you guys have a kind of interesting setup for creating an innovative environment and collaboration. So I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about that, and then let's talk a little bit about kind of the innovative environment within the agency structure. So.
Yeah, New Lab is a work in progress that was started by a development company called MacroC that Mihai and I and about 10 other people were invited to be the first members of. It's currently in a temporary building in the Navy Yard next to a gigantic building that's under being renovated, got renovated. So it'll probably be another year before that's open. Eventually it'll be a large facility that includes not just makers and innovators, but also auditoriums, classrooms, and a huge fabrication shop. So part of their central vision that we also share is tying together prototyping and thinking experimentation with manufacturing here right next to you. Not just locally in the US, which is hard enough to do and make any money, but right next to you. So that is going to have a huge effect, I think, on just being able to iterate creatively, not to mention the economic benefits and everything else, depending on your views about keeping things domestically made. So it's an amazing group of people. We all are separate entities. Some of us are artists and designers, roboticists, architects, speculative designers, product designers, and we each have our own separate practice within the studio. It's a large open space. We have our own areas within it. So I would say we're more of a loose collective than an actual collective, because 70% of the time, I don't know how Mihai feels about this, 70 to 80% of the time, most of us work on our own projects for our own clients or for ourselves. But the amazing opportunity that we have being next to each other, and there's no substitute for physical proximity. Emailing your friends will never be as good as turning to the person next to you and shouting, hey, look at this, help me with this. So when big projects come along that are usually for agencies that have tight timelines and are pretty ambitious, we have all of these skills right next to us, and we collaborate quite often for those projects. So it's a really good mix. And it's, right now, we're relatively small. It's like a 6,000 square foot space with about 20 people. And eventually it's gonna be like 100,000 square feet and a few hundred people or something. Yeah, it's insanely large.
So we practice something like this at Huge as well, and we found that that's definitely something that's extremely helpful in terms of collaboration and helping to get the ideas further. And I agree on physical, like proximity, nothing can really substitute for that. So we bring large teams together that work on projects, and they sit like project management, UX, creative, visual design, technology, business analyst, strategy, so that they can see each other and talk to each other on a regular basis. And then we have huddle rooms where we can also, like, you know, regroup, so that it's a little bit more closed space, because we are like in an open space environment.
Yeah, so there's a few things there. One is the variety on the team, and then there's direction of the team, and then there's the environment. So in order to achieve innovation, there's a few factors that have to come in place. One is a collective vision. So by having a cross-functional team, you're naturally creating the stress and friction. And through a very defined vision, you can achieve, chances are usually somewhat of incremental innovation, which means that we look at all the different processes and entities and experiences that that consist of a problem. Sometimes it's not about problem solving, but problem forming. We rethink of what are we trying to achieve. Then we try to come up with a solution. And by having a cross-functional team, again, we mentioned a lot of engineers, we mentioned a lot of designers. Innovation not only comes in the form of experiential innovation. There's a lot of innovation that comes in forms of process innovation or operational innovation. Organizational design. I mean, there's a whole bunch of areas for improvement. By having a lot of different mindsets come up trying to solve this problem, chances a lot of the times you come up with interesting solutions that are not only expressed in form of new technologies and new products and new services. It could be service design, it could be anything. Now, the cross-functional team also creates friction and distress, which, when it's properly aligned, typically yields for more of a disruptive innovation, which is not taking things that already exist, but trying to come up with brand new solutions for existing problems. And the last factor is environment. So always being in a familiar environment also already triggers a specific mindset. So it's always healthy to take people outside of their comfort zone. A lot of the times the teams will be in one place, but you mentioned about clients and showing clients in client workshops. We tend, for example, to take them out of their office every single time, because if a client's in their office, they already have a predefined mindset, they already, not to mention the interruption and distractions they already have. So setting up the environment, having the right people in the room, and having enough different variety of mindsets, and sometimes you even throw in, I mean, I'll tell my client, we need a strategist, we need a media person, we need a technologist, and I need a surfer, because he's gonna come out with, chances are he's not gonna know anything about this project, but he's gonna, from his perspective, gonna say something from an end user perspective that's really gonna trigger some conversation, and is gonna come up with a really disruptive solution to that specific problem that we're creating.
Yeah, I think that was at the core of like New Lab, or like where we've come to now. We had kind of originally been part of a larger, looser collective called DAM, which stands for Dark Matter Manufacturing, which kind of changes every time we all get together and have a couple drinks. But the idea was initially to just create a space where, almost recreating like the MIT lab. You have a lot of like MIT technologists. I think it's like the largest TED fellow concentration in New York City or something like that. But the idea being that, you know, around the water cooler, you would have multiple points of interaction. So you never knew exactly what was going to come up, or like what kinds of ideas were going to happen. I mean, how we had come up with the robotic arm was literally like the RFP came in, it was like, hey, you know, who's got a half an hour to brainstorm on this, you know? And that was like a really, it was just a great kind of opportunity for all of us to work together and like bring our specific skill sets to the table in a way that was different.
But the ideas don't always come up by just using something for the first time. A lot of it has to do with like deep understanding on what you're using, the medium, the technology, the specific hardware. And so these iterations and deep understanding, so everybody understands, like creative understand how technology will work, technology understanding where creative wants to go. So I think there is a great value in being able to really spend time and look at what each other does and how they work together.
Absolutely.
To make sure that
inspiring each other. That's,
yeah.
That's a lot of the point of cross-functional teams.
And educating each other in terms of like what the thought process is and what's important, what to pay attention to, so that you can kind of like, you know, challenge each other in a way that you wouldn't be able to otherwise if you're not working collaboratively together.
We call it the art of what's possible. Yes, exactly.
So how are you kind of inspiring and motivating those who might not be as technically savvy, and what about like the clients that might be fearful or resistant? Like how are you getting through some of those obstacles?
So within the agency, we've actually just kicked off something called, we have a huge school where we bring people around the world, you know, from outside the agency, and trying to educate them and take them through different like huge UX school, huge technology school. We just kicked off Huge University, which is an opportunity for people who are not technical to learn about technology. So basically, there was a session before that talking about like bringing education to your people. So it's an 8-week program where we, it's a hybrid of a classroom setting plus online, where people from UX, project management, strategy, and different teams in the organization can actually sit down in a room and learn about how to implement things and how to use technology from mobile to web to how things are actually made. So that's how. So that's one way that we are actually bringing the education to the teams within the agency. We're also spending a lot of time on different specific like focus sessions and meetups and presentations to make sure that people that everybody understands and learns as much as they possibly can about what we do and what the industry is about and where we're going. When it comes to the clients, it's a lot about spending time with them and inspiring them through both conversations on topic and off topic and telling them about what's going on in the industry and letting them into the process that we're going through and making them part of that. So not being doing a big reveal, but actually having workshops, having them in the office, going out to them, spending a lot of time together, and talking through how we work, why we do certain things, and how we bring industry experience that's outside of just agency into the process that we use to implement.
Eric, I know that your client base right now is more arts organizations and people that might be more embracing of technology and innovation. What's been your experience like working with clients like that versus kind of the more traditional marketing client?
Well, I do work with both. Usually the brands and agencies I work with are medium-sized, a little more forward-thinking, but not always. I also have some large corporate clients, and by the time they approach me, they're usually already a little bit excited, so I don't have to proselytize from the ground up. But if the idea I think there's also a divide between making something a one-off that's going to draw attention to their brand versus making an actual product, where the latter really requires more. It's obviously a way deeper process, and historical context is critical. So for both of them, I would say, but especially for the latter, if they get a little gun-shy, as a teacher, I try to exploit the professorial vibe. So I'm like, all right, let's step back and let's look at the history of innovation in this area, not just with your competitors now, not just in the last 5 years, but all the way back a century, say. And if you spell out that process, you can see where there are these breakpoints where something crazy was attempted, and some of it fails and some of it wildly succeeds. So that's sometimes inspire people. It's more effective with higher up people, the leaders in organizations, I would say, versus kind of middle management, because they're on the line to take a risk. They're on the line, like their jobs might be on the line, for example, but someone who is a leader is more accustomed to thinking on a larger scale and also has the power to take that kind of risk. So for me, like, history is a big thing, and also the kind of workshops you're talking about, that also is fun. I think that's a fun way to get them excited by some possibilities they haven't seen before. So I'll sometimes go in and teach a one-day thing, if there's time for it, and make people who've never done that just get their hands on it, just to get a little bit of the flavor, and that sometimes inspires them and makes it less intimidating. When it's a big black box, it's like, oh God, I don't understand this. We're going to have to pay someone to do it. What if it breaks? If they have an in-house team and they're experienced with that, then they're not as afraid of that, but then they probably wouldn't be hiring outside people in that case.
Yeah. There's two sides to that. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, no,
Change
go
your question.
ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, how do you measure innovation?
Oh God. I like the last question.
I told him I wasn't going to give him any stumpers.
And measuring innovation is probably as hard as we've been fighting lately with measuring return on experience. Like, it's such a convoluted, ambiguous word that it's really hard to measure. I'm gonna have to think about that for a second.
Do you want to go back to the question?
Yeah, and while I do
your
that, I'm
favorite
gonna
question?
think about the
Yeah.
about the next one. So on the last question, there's two types of education. Like you said, there's an internal education, there's an external education. An internal, for one, is probably a little more challenging than the other groups here, because we have, over like, I don't even know how many, like 37 to 40 offices globally with 12,000 people. So education at scale, it's actually a lot harder in educational and contained environment with a couple of offices where you can just fly over people, do show and tells. So we have to scale horizontally, build center of excellences, and we have to record everything. We have to rely on strong online knowledge management tools to post a lot of the projects, efforts, presentations, pitches, and we have to rely on relations to actually disseminate and try to feed out all that information on the multiple geos. So we would have presentations locally. We try to scale that. We have little road tours. So I've done global tours explaining all sorts of different technologies and different experiences. Now on the client side, it's funny, we haven't touched on that, but clients read a lot and they think they know a lot. So a lot of education, the client is not even on the art of what's possible, is trying to tell them that the solution that they chose is probably not the right solution. So, and to do that, you have to put yourself in their shoes and you have to understand what problem they're trying to solve. So it's not about client coming in and say, I want to stick all these QR codes and NFCs in all my stores and tell them, well, that's an okay idea, or that's a good or a bad idea, but really what are the problems that you're solving and why you're doing this, and perhaps have you considered other alternative solutions, and what if people don't engage with it the way you're imagining it. And there's a lot of education on different approaches to solve similar problems. And the key for that, again, is simplicity, because chances are if you come in, again, and you start telling them about the technical implications of doing everything, it doesn't really make sense, but the key and the theme for any innovation on emerging tech to be successful at the end of the day is simplicity. So you have to simplify it. I was talking to Paul earlier today, and he says he has his teams come in and pitch a new idea, and his concept was actually quite cool. You start with 100 points, and for every word you use, you deduct a point. So the ones with the highest points are probably going to be the most successful, and I think that really applies for every concept that we try to sell or put in place.
That's interesting. So I think we're getting short on time. Do you guys have any final thoughts? I'm not sure if we have time for any audience questions, if there are any. We have about 5 minutes. Are there any questions from the audience for these guys?
Not everybody at once, please.
I know.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any final? Oh, we do have a question. Hi.
How savvy do you think users need to be? And do you think that there are certain targets that are more receptive to creative technology than others?
I can take that.
So how savvy are?
How savvy do you think end users need to be?
How,
Do you think that there are certain targets that are more receptive to creative technology and new things than others?
so how savvy do end users need to be? And do you think there's targets that are more accepting of technology innovation?
At the end of the day, I think consumer technology innovation, the consumer devices have been driving expectations. And the world that we live today and the challenge that a lot of the brands are facing is that expectations by far exceed capabilities on the brand side, which is where you start seeing a lot of the brands jumping in and try to bring in a lot of the technologies that are widely popular and try to put them in place. But so I think it's not about how savvy the consumer is, because at the end of the day, our job is to create seamless communication between brands and consumers. So whatever the expectation is, we try to meet that on the brand side. And of course, we have to one-up that and delight and try to deliver something that exceeds expectation. But what we're seeing is that yes, I mean, we can talk that millennials, they're far more embedded on experimenting with new technologies, and the Gen X and Ys are perhaps a little bit not. But at the end of the day, it's almost right now a catch-up game. There's a lot of brands just looking at everything that's out there and trying to figure out what makes sense to implement on a wider scale.
I think it's also important to distinguish with the word savvy. I think sometimes it's used as a shortcut for someone who's able to deal with a bad interface. And in that case, no one should be expected to have savvy. But if savvy means just comfort and familiarity with the dominant interaction modes that we see in consumer devices, and also now we're seeing in toys and furniture and product design, then I think that's it's okay to make something that's a little bit ahead of the curve and expect consumers to adopt it, as long as you take absolute responsibility for having the interface be as elegant and simple as possible. If it's intuitive, then you shouldn't need savvy in a way. So that in a way you want to outmode the requirement for savvy, period.
Savvy equals sophisticated?
Well, to me, it's actually less about how savvy, because I think consumers are savvy. I think it's about how useful is the tool or the product that you're building for them. And if consumers find it useful, then they will adapt and they will use it. So it's more about the value you bring to the consumer and to the user than whether or not, and they will learn it. Like that history has shown it with every product launch that happened. If something brings value, users adapt it and they're happy using it, and with obviously nice interfaces and great implementations, that's all you really need.
Well, it's also like I think the younger and younger the audience gets, the more there's a proficiency in illiteracy. When you see like 2-year-olds that can't really talk, like navigating iPads and whatnot, there's like a comfort level there that makes me feel old.
But there is a lot of products in market, so I think to me it's a lot about value that you bring, and that's what we focus on. For example, there's another question.
Hi. Yeah, so for labs, what's the structure of your lab and how are you like managing that space? What types of people are using it?
We don't have a formal lab. So what we do at Huge is we structure the allocation in a way that allows people to have breaks between projects so that they're able to focus on the work that they want to do. And we have a running list of ideas that they can pick up, or they can come up with their own ideas to work on. So it's less, and we foster collaboration and building and help them build teams to bring skill set that they really need to get their idea to production. So it's not necessarily like formal lab where you go in and you work on something. It's more about, here is an idea, what do you need, what kind of partner you need, will help bring that together for you, and then you're on your own. It's a lot about being curious. It's not necessarily giving somebody a space, but it's about excitement and making sure that people feel interested and curious about getting something done. And then sometimes taking their own time to do that, not necessarily like, company designated time.
So I think that we've run out of time. I love the way that this has been structured because we have a lot of time during breaks and during lunch to have, more casual conversations about all of this, and our panelists have been invited to stay for all that. So hopefully we can continue the conversation in smaller groups, and let's hear it for this panel.